You are standing on the bank of a river in the year 922. The air smells like wood smoke and wet earth. In front of you, a ship has been pulled up onto the sand, and on its deck lies a dead man, dressed as if he is about to sail somewhere important. He is not going to be pushed out to sea in a blaze of glory. Not yet. First, something far stranger is about to happen. You have probably seen the version of this scene 100 times. A flaming Viking longship drifting alone into the sunset, sent off by grieving warriors on the shore. It feels ancient. It feels true. It is almost completely made up. So what did a Viking funeral actually look like? And why does the real version disturb people more than the fake one ever could? Think about where that burning ship image even comes from. No saga, no runestone, no eyewitness account describes warriors shoving a flaming ship off a beach and watching it drift away. The image feels old because it has been repeated so many times in films and paintings and 100 fantasy novels that repetition has hardened into something that looks like memory. But repetition is not evidence. When you actually go looking for evidence, you find something slower, stranger, and far closer to the ground. Most of what you think you know about Viking ship burials comes from movies, not from history. The flaming ship at sea image barely appears anywhere in the actual archaeological or written record. What we have instead is something far more grounded, far more ritualized, and in some cases, far more brutal. Start with the evidence. Real evidence, not legend. In the early 10th century, an Arab diplomat and writer named Ahmad ibn Fadlan traveled north along the Volga River through what is now Russia on a mission for the Caliph of Baghdad. Along the way, he encountered a group of Rus, Viking-age traders and warriors with roots in Scandinavia. And he watched one of them die. What he wrote afterward is the single most detailed eyewitness account of a Viking funeral that exists anywhere in the historical record. Ibn Fadlan was not a Viking. He was an outsider taking notes the way an anthropologist might today. That makes his account both incredibly valuable and a little tricky. He was describing something completely foreign to him, filtered through his own assumptions. Historians treat it carefully for that reason, but the core details line up with something else: the dirt. Specifically, the dirt at Oseberg, Norway. In 1904, archaeologists excavated a massive burial mound near the Oslo Fjord and found something extraordinary preserved in the wet, oxygen-starved clay. An entire Viking ship, almost 22 meters long, with its oak hull still largely intact after 1,000 years underground. Inside it were textiles, carved wooden sledges, a four-wheeled cart decorated with intricate animal carvings, beds, buckets, and the remains of two women, one older, one younger, buried together. This is the Oseberg ship burial, and it remains one of the richest Viking-age graves ever found anywhere in the world. No fire touched this one, no drifting out to sea. The ship was hauled up from the water onto dry land, packed with everything its occupants might need in another life, and then buried under a mound of earth so large it is still visible on the landscape today, more than 1,000 years later. This is the pattern that shows up again and again at real Viking burial sites, from Gokstad to the Vendel cemeteries in Sweden. Ships were buried, not set adrift. Sometimes they were burned first, then covered with earth right where they sat on land. The fire, when it happened, was not a goodbye gesture sent toward the horizon. It was a transformation, done in front of everyone, with smoke rising straight up into the sky rather than drifting out over open water where no one could watch it finish. Now picture the scene Ibn Fadlan actually describes, because this is where the real story stops being pretty. When an important Rus man died, his body did not go into the ground immediately. It was kept, sometimes for as long as 10 days, wrapped and set aside, while the rest of the community returned to ordinary life around it, trading, eating, arguing, waiting. During that time, preparations were made. The community built a temporary wooden structure to house the body. They prepared his ship, hauling it onto the riverbank, and arranging it the way you might stage a room for a guest you expect to arrive soon. They gathered his belongings, weapons, fine clothing, jars of drink, food meant to last a long journey. And then, according to Ibn Fadlan, someone asked a question you would never expect to hear at a funeral today. They asked for a volunteer to die with him. According to Ibn Fadlan, a slave girl belonging to the dead man came forward and agreed to join him in death. Over the following days, she was treated almost like a bride preparing for a wedding, rather than a woman preparing to die. She drank, she sang, she visited tent after tent, where, according to the account, men told her they were doing so out of love and loyalty to her master, a strange and unsettling form of honor passed from the living to someone about to stop being one of them. On the day of the funeral itself, she was lifted up 3 times so she could look over a frame built like a doorway. And each time she came down, she reported what she had seen. Her dead relatives seated and waiting, and beyond them, a green and beautiful place that did not look like anywhere on earth. Then she was led calmly to the ship. What happened next is graphic enough that Ibn Fadlan's account has been debated and scrutinized by historians for over a century. Inside the ship, beside the body of the dead man, the girl was killed, and the vessel, the 2 bodies, and the grave goods around them were all set on fire together, right there on the riverbank in full daylight, in front of the entire gathered community. The ship did not drift away. It burned in place, the smoke rising in a thick, black column straight up into the sky, until nothing was left but ash and the curled, blackened skeleton of the hull. That ash and wreckage was then built up into a mound of earth, sealing the whole event under a permanent marker that anyone passing on the river could see for years afterward. This is the part most retellings leave out entirely because it is uncomfortable. It does not fit the cinematic, peaceful image people want from the Viking funeral. But historians like Neil Price, a leading archaeologist of the Viking Age, whose research has reconstructed much of what we know about Norse ritual and belief, have argued that scenes like this were not random cruelty performed for shock value. They were deeply embedded in a Norse worldview where the next life mattered every bit as much as this one, and where a powerful man was expected to arrive there properly equipped, properly accompanied, and properly honored, the same way a king might travel with an entourage rather than alone. If you believed completely and without doubt that another world was waiting on the other side of that fire, would a single death really have felt as final to you as it does to us? Here is the part that should make you stop and think. We are not actually sure how common this exact ritual was. Ibn Fadlan describes one funeral for one man among one specific group of rust traders far from Scandinavia itself, along a river thousands of miles from the fjords most people picture when they hear the word Viking. The Oseberg burial, by contrast, shows no clear evidence of human sacrifice at all, just 2 women laid to rest with extraordinary wealth and care. Viking-age Scandinavia covered hundreds of years in a huge geographic range, stretching from Iceland in the west to the edges of the Byzantine world in the east. Burial customs almost certainly varied enormously by region, by wealth, by era, and by who was doing the burying and why. That is the twist most people never hear. There was no single Viking funeral. There were dozens of versions of it, shaped by local belief, status, and circumstance, and the flaming ship at sea image you picture is essentially a 19th and 20th century invention, popularized by Romantic-era painters and later by Hollywood, layered on top of fragments of real ritual that were far stranger and far more varied than any single image can hold. Why does this matter to you now, in a world with funeral homes and printed programs and quiet chapels? Because the instinct underneath all of it is still yours. The Vikings were not obsessed with death for its own sake. They were obsessed with what death said about a life and about the people left standing around it. Every object placed in that ship, every guest who came forward to play a part, every ritual gesture from the tents to the doorway frame to the fire itself, was an attempt to answer a question that has not gone away in 1100 years. How do you send someone off in a way that actually matches who they were? You still do this, even if the shape of it looks completely different. Maybe not with a ship and fire, but with a photograph chosen carefully out of hundreds. A song picked because it meant something only the 2 of you understood. A eulogy written and rewritten at 2 in the morning until it finally captures the person rather than just describing them. The instinct to make an ending mean something, to make it match a life rather than simply end it, is not a Viking invention. It might be one of the oldest human instincts there is, older than ships, older than fire rituals, older than any single culture's version of it. The Vikings just built that instinct bigger, louder, and far more literally than most of us ever will. So go back to that riverbank in 922. The ship is not drifting toward a peaceful horizon. The smoke is going straight up, thick and dark, while the people who knew him stand close enough to feel the heat. It is not the version you imagined. It is something far more specific, far more strange, and far more human than the myth ever let you believe.